Welcome, beautiful souls, to the Primal Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Angela, the attachment activist, because we need more attachment to push against this detachment culture in society. And we are on the Primal Parenting Podcast giving you insights into all of the barriers to primal parenting that's according to your God-given instincts. And we're going to give you the real science and information from real experts to help guide you in applying your instincts and your parenting style in the modern world that's conducive to how children really need to be cared for. And one of the 5 baselines that we'll be covering repeatedly on this podcast is nutrition / integrative medicine or natural medicine, which are all kind of bundled in together, right? And today I'm thrilled to have as a guest Tracy Slepcevic, who is an integrative medicine specialist. She has studied over 15 years in how to heal children from the underlying causes of autism and other environmentally induced epidemic disorders in our modern society. And she is the author of Warrior Mom, A Mother's Journey in Healing Her Son from Autism. Welcome, Tracy.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. And I know that your story is particularly encouraging in this modern society that we find ourselves in, where the statistics just seem to climb every day in these childhood epidemics, especially autism. And I wanted to start with your story, even though the underlying causes of all of these epidemics are the same. But specifically, autism is such a challenging disorder for children to recover from. And the fact that you've been successful in this just speaks volumes to the self-education that you have done in this space. And so would you like to share a little bit of your journey in discovering what would actually help your child recover from autism?
So when Noah was diagnosed with autism, I took a biomedical approach to addressing it. And that was addressing the underlying biological conditions associated with, autism or other neurological disorders for that matter. So it all began with testing for those underlying conditions, doing the blood work, doing, fecal and urine tests and all that. We are swimming in a toxic soup, so there are a lot of reasons why these kids regress. But Noah specifically, he was definitely an ear infection baby when he was younger. So a lot of antibiotics, which, tend to coat the gut and the intestinal wall. So it inhibits the child's ability to absorb proteins and nutrients and all that good stuff for them. And then over time, it creates leaky gut and it breaks that barrier. Those epithelial cells start to break down and creates gaps in the intestinal wall. So then all that bad stuff that we're supposed to be getting rid of actually gets into the bloodstream and acts as like opiates on the brain. So when you get down to the basics and you just start with very simple with the gut. But first I tell people their parents are like, well, what is the number one thing that you did that worked for your child? So
Yeah.
I set a clear intention that my son was going to live a normal life. And that was the number one thing I did. And I felt it down to a cellular level. I truly did. Like there was nobody who could tell me that Noah was, not going to be able to function or that he was going to need care for the rest of his life. And so I took a different approach. And from there, diet is huge. Eliminating those inflammatory foods, gluten, dairy, soy, sugars, refined sugars, and carbohydrates. I tell people, if you can't understand what the ingredient means, you shouldn't be eating it. And that is where Noah's healing truly began.
I love that you bring up your mindset going into this and how empowered you were. And can you talk a little bit about what influences were there for you that gave you that sense of empowerment that you can go out? Because one of the baselines is community, one of the baselines of primal parenting. And I feel like that's such an important message for parents to go find your community and don't just take whatever the mainstream information stream feeds you, but rather go out and find the real experts in your community and parents who have been there and see what information you can get from them, because we really do have to self-educate. So how were you inspired to feel this empowered and know that you could help your son?
So I always say God sends me angels at my, most darkest times. And a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Joshua Burka, who was my naturopath at the time, when Noah was diagnosed with autism, I had to run back to the office for something. And I say there are no accidents because his office was adjacent to ours. And as I was walking down the hall, he saw me crying and he reached out and gave me a hug and he's like, "What's the matter?" And I told him, I said, "Well, Noah was diagnosed with autism." And he just backs up for a second. He looks me in the eye and he said, "Noah's going to be fine. I want you to go home and I want you to do your research because kids with autism are making great strides with biomedical intervention." Now, at the time, I knew a lot about nutrition, but I didn't know much about biomedical. And so I went home and I sucked those tears back up into my eyes and I seriously was reading book after book. Back then you could do Google searches and on healing autism and get alternative approaches. And I went to conferences, I went to parent meetings and talks. I did everything I could to, immerse myself into the whole autism world and how it was that I could heal my son. I didn't want to hear about, how can I put a Band-Aid on it?
Mhm.
But, addressing those underlying conditions. So I immediately started the diet right away. Because if you read any book back then on, healing autism of some sort, then you hear about gluten-free, dairy-free. So I started with gluten-free, dairy-free. And my naturopath also assisted me in finding, back then they were called DAN doctors, and they followed a Defeat Autism Now protocol. DAN no longer exists. There is MAPS, Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs. People can go through medmaps.org. They can go to reactforhope.org. I mean, there's so many different ways to find physicians that address these underlying conditions. So he assisted me in doing so, and I found a really good functional medicine osteopathic doctor.
And put some of those resources in the show notes because that's so important for parents to realize that there are many other sources of help and information outside of just the mainstream pediatrician.
Yeah, so in my book, I put a lot of those resources in part 2 of my book. So people know where to go, what to do. React for Hope is in there, medmaps.org is in there. Children's Health Defense. You can read a lot of articles on there that can help, with removing environmental toxins from the home. What's toxic in our environment. You can learn a lot of stuff about that. There's some great books. Kenneth Bach wrote the 4 A's,
Yes.
autism, ADHD, asthma, and allergies.
Amazing.
And he did.
I found that book in a thrift store.
Really? And
Yeah.
I say there truly are no accidents. I mean, books pop out to us and people come into our space and all these things for very specific and beautiful reasons. Because when you ask God for help, he may not respond the way it is that you want him to respond, but in some way or another, if you truly believe and you have faith, then he will respond in one way or another.
Beautiful. That's so beautiful. Yeah, when I came across Dr. Kenneth Bach's book, this wasn't even on my radar, and I was a health journalist, but none of the childhood epidemics and what's causing them, even that they were epidemics, it really wasn't on my radar. I knew autism was increasing, but I didn't know that that ADD was exploding as well, and that at least in Dr. Brock's book, he explains a lot of the same causes are affecting all of these epidemics, and that the same biomedical interventions can help them. And so I guess, what would you say to just the layperson to best explain what biomedical is? Because I remember seeing the book and just didn't even understand what the term biomedical meant. in terms of treating underlying health conditions for children?
So that's what it is. It's treating the underlying biological conditions so associated with whatever is ailing the person. So instead of putting a Band-Aid on it and just treating the symptoms, which over time, it's still going to get worse. The medications are only going to keep it at bay. And then one medication leads to another, to another, to another. And so if you address what's going on, and there's always something going on underneath. Autism isn't, you can carry a gene for anything and have a pre-genetic disposition, but it's going to be some sort of environmental factor that triggers it. So learning to, eliminate those environmental factors from your environment and to address the underlying conditions, whether it be inflammation. And typically, most of these conditions begin with the gut. So all these things, and they feed off of sugar and carbs, and then there's those foods that just cause inflammation because they're genetically modified or they have glyphosate in it or all those things. But really addressing the underlying conditions to treat the problem and not mask the problem is what biomedical intervention is.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. It'll be a light bulb moment for some parents. And this is Autism Awareness Month right now. So we do want to let parents know that there are alternative sources of information and treatments that you can do to improve your child.
They can also purchase the recorded version of the conference that I just did, where a lot of doctors talk about addressing those underlying conditions and genetic conditions and all that stuff. So if you address those conditions, usually you get better functionality. If anything, they feel better. They're not having self-injurious behaviors. PANDAS, pediatric autoimmune neuropsychotropic disorder associated with streptococcus. That is a huge one for parents to test for.
Yes.
I never even realized until recently that it is actually life-threatening. So as I was talking to Dr. Pierre Corey, he was telling me that his daughter almost died from PANDAS. And it's chronic inflammation in the body, in the brain, mostly from the strep virus.
Yeah.
So as it travels to the brain, it causes major inflammation on the brain and it causes regression. But it also is the leading cause of tics and Tourette's. And, most kids with autism and ADHD and all those things, they usually test positive for PANDAS as well. So I have a great speaker that spoke on PANDAS and, how to treat it. And I also talk about it in my book at length. So it's very important to address these things because we never even realize what's going on underneath and that they can be life-threatening.
Yes. And PANDAS and PANS, which is now they've retermed it in some cases as pediatric autoimmune neuropsychological syndrome, because they found that it's more than just strep that can trigger these symptoms, right? And it's now, I believe 1 in 200 is the last statistic I saw, that children diagnosed with PANS. And you have to wonder, like you said, with the PANS being life-threatening, and all of these things are on a spectrum. They can have a little or a lot, right? So it's mild or severe, and you have to wonder how much of that suicide rate is tied into or has underlying PANS symptoms. And of course, there are plenty of social and psychological and emotional factors that weigh into that. But PANS is actually one of the symptoms is suicidal ideation. Is that right?
Yes. Now, the main treatment for PANDAS and PANS is typically antibiotics, and usually backed up with IVIG, IV immunoglobulins. So, to boost the immune system. But then in that moment, you start to tear up the gut again because those antibiotics they're put on them for quite some time.
Because children are so much more susceptible to these environmental toxins and the damage that they create to the gut. Would you say, as a practitioner, that most of these epidemics, the underlying conditions that are contributing, have to do with the gut?
most of everything that ails, you know, the community these days it starts in the gut. It's all there. I had a 77-year-old client yesterday with type 2 diabetes and major neuropathy. And I'm like, it all starts with the gut. So tell me what you're eating. Oh, I'm drinking these Ensures. And I'm like,
Mm.
so he brought it with me to show me, or brought it with him to show me. And I'm looking at it and I said, here, I'm just going to educate you just a little bit. You know, as I start to name off the ingredients of this, drink, I'm going to tell you that the first few ingredients are what it's based out of. You know, it's got the most, at the first few ingredients. So
Right.
first we have water, which is fine. And then we have corn syrup. And I'm like, you do know this is like death to you with type 2 diabetes. And you're drinking 2 to 3 of them a day because you don't want to cook and you're choosing easy. And like the fourth ingredient was like canola oil. I'm like, people don't realize that canola oil and vegetable oil is all genetically modified. It's all corn based. It's all horrible for you. And it's that oil that's not a healthy oil. Use coconut, avocado, nut oils, or even olive oil as long as you're not cooking it in a pan. He was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it. But so many people just don't understand what these different things.
Yes. And that's one of the main messages I wanted to get across today is that even if your child isn't having these kind of symptoms or issues, you can prevent them from occurring by limiting the toxic load and paying attention to the diet and inflammatory foods. Would you say that you can be proactive with the same kind of approaches, natural medicine and good diet to prevent the epidemics from manifesting?
So I truly believe that God put everything that we need to be healthy here on this earth. And sure, there are going to be things that go around that make people sick or if they have a weakened immune system. But if you're eating right and you're taking care of yourself, and these days, because our soil and everything's so nutrient depleted, we do have to supplement with vitamins, especially vitamin D. It is super important that at least, you get at least 5,000 IUs of vitamin D a day. It's a cancer preventative. It's just we're not getting enough of it. And to research those inflammatory foods and to make sure that what you're lacking, you actually make up for in supplementation. But you have to start cleaning up the gut for your body to be able to even absorb those supplements. And, bypass the one a day vitamin because, it's going to come out exactly the way it went in and your body will not absorb it. So there's some really great, brands of supplements that I feel are super important to focus on than the cheaper brands. And
Okay, so they should not be synthetic vitamins. They should be food-based.
it doesn't necessarily have to be food-based, but from a reputable company that actually, does the science as to whether it breaks down in their body. Some of the different brands we have, like Designs for Health, Orn, Douglas Laboratories, Nordic Naturals takes the market on the omegas. Yarrow is good. Orthomolecular, Metagenics, Pure,
Okay.
Biotics Research, Clara Labs, Vital Nutrients, traditional medicinals. I mean, there's so much out there that these brands are much better than your typical store-bought, Centrum or all that.
Right.
Please avoid those because it's
Yeah,
not just
realized or learned recently that some of the B vitamins are even toxic if they're synthetic.
yes. So there's many different ingredients that you can look up as to what you should be avoiding in supplements. It's really good to look at that, look at the ingredients.
Yes. Okay. So these really good source of nutrients and the proper diet, it really, really actually matters. That's what I think that parents need to connect the dots on. And it's like this junk food has been so normalized. And I see what my kids are seeing on their TikTok feed. And these influencers are just like, they're just constantly eating these like colored and red dye number 3 and all of those really highly toxic foods, and they're almost glamorizing it. So we have to push back on that as parents and say, no, this isn't normal. Our bodies don't know what to do with this stuff, and it is actually going to hurt you. It is hurting you.
They're going to eventually get leaky gut if they're eating candy and garbage and things we can't understand. So all these different things really start to cause that leaky gut by killing off or deadening those epithelial cells that break barriers to our bloodstream. And those different things could be easily disguised. So let's talk about like natural flavors and colorings. So that can be disguised as MSG, as GMO. So in the United States, we don't put any regulations on how they describe certain ingredients. Citric acid, people think, oh, well, it's, sounds very citrusy. It's actually corn-based, and corn, unless it's non-GMO or organic, then we can pretty much, figure out that it is genetically modified and it's full of glyphosate and all those different things. So corn really messes up the gut, but you can still have corn. It just has to be in its non-GMO organic form.
Yes, thank you. I think that's such a good point too, is there are healthy versions that are not processed with all of these chemicals that we can give our kids that they'll love, they'll enjoy. It's not like an issue of deprivation. It's an issue of just being educated about ingredients, right?
Right. And then, there's a lot of things like when you buy shredded cheese, there's a caking agent in it, and it's actually sawdust. So,
Shred your own cheese.
right. All these things, like you just need to kind of go back in time and just figure it out. Because I could tell you everything was I just had to focus on eating real food with Noah. And as we both did it, who had like severe fibromyalgia, started to feel better.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Funny how that works.
Yeah. And a lot of the cysts, polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, a lot of it can be fixed with a clean diet. I mean, I had all of that. And before I even knew, I had I had over 9 surgeries. And, so it started with one surgery that led to another, to another, to another, until I really learned about diet and was able to clean up my diet along with Noah's.
What about AD and ADHD? What are some of the underlying lifestyle inputs, I guess, or factors that can contribute to those types of symptoms?
So ADD and ADHD fall on the spectrum. It's just a much higher functioning part of the spectrum. And people could be like, no, my kid's not on the spectrum. It is a very broad spectrum. And that's why when Dr. Bach wrote his book, he said ADD, ADHD, autism, and even Dr. Jerry Cartznell, when he wrote Healing and Preventing Autism with Jenny McCarthy, they focused a lot on, ADD, ADHD, and autism, the three. And, any neurological disorder, you're going to have very similar underlying conditions. You're going to have a lot of inflammation. You're going to have inflammation on the brain. You're going to have environmental toxins that are floating around in the body that are going to impact them neurologically.
That is so good to know for those parents who do have a child with autism. We'll put all those resources in the show notes, in addition to Tracy's book, Warrior Mom, A Mother's Journey in Healing Her Son from Autism. So also please like and subscribe if you are enjoying this kind of content that brings you other perspectives outside of the mainstream information stream, because we have to be a community as parents and share knowledge and help each other. And Tracy is such an amazing example of this, the kind of resource you want to have if you are struggling with any of these symptoms, or if you just want to prevent your child from developing these kind of symptoms. I feel like parents who have been through kind of the worst case scenario have gotten so educated. I used to say that the ones that I interviewed as a health journalist, like it's like they have a PhD in how to heal their child, because it's their child and they'll do anything and just won't stop until they find the answers. And Tracy is such a beautiful example of that. I wanted to ask you also about just awareness of the numbers, the statistics, because they are so hard to track. A lot of times you'll hear the statistics on autism and all the childhood epidemics and the chronic disease epidemics of childhood. You'll hear those statistics like 1 in 6 that the CDC puts out, or, the autism rates 1 in 54, I think was the most recent statistic that we got from Johns Hopkins. But those are actually quite old, based on data from 2007 and also from the CDC, which isn't necessarily counting all of the cases like other resources.
Those ones that came out in the CDC for the United States was 1 in 36. And that is based on 8-year-olds only. So it's not, there's no adult onset autism included in there. There's no range from 2 to 17 or anything. Children's Health Defense in 2017 did the range between 2 and 17, and the results were 1 in 30. In the state of California, we have 1 in 22, I think 1 in 5 boys. So boys are more impacted, and experts are saying by 2030, we're looking at the autism rate of, being 1 in 2 kids. So 50% of the children will have autism. I truly believe that it's much higher. So you have to understand the CDC only does 8-year-olds, and they only do their evaluation every 4 years. And when they do their evaluation, it usually comes out 2 years later. So there's a huge delay in that, and numbers are not correct. There's no broad spectrum for it. And I really believe it's more like we're looking at, 1 in 10, but that's my own personal opinion. Everywhere you look, there's a child with autism. So it's definitely something to be conscious of and take a look at.
Yes, and thank you for saying that, because I've heard so many experts who track on these numbers. They say the exact same thing. They say that the data is old, and this is such a moving target that unfortunately the statistics are much worse than what they are being reported. There's a source called National Survey of Children's Health that goes off of insurance data. So that's a little more thorough and accurate. And the last figure that they had was 43% of children in the US have a chronic health condition. And so this is so incredibly urgent. And I really appreciate Tracy, Warrior Mom, all the Warrior Moms out there, and parents who are sounding the alarm on this, because it really is happening before our eyes at staggering, increasing rates. And there are direct causes and inputs from the environment that are causing this, and we have to recognize that and pay attention to protect our kids. I would say also, in the spirit of celebrating recovery, children with these epidemic conditions, they can heal. And we don't know as parents where the tipping point is of toxicity, and that's going to spiral, right, their symptoms into an actual diagnosis. So I wondered if you had anything to say about that concept of a tipping point, and how parents, need to be vigilant, because you don't know where your child, they may seem okay for now and taking in the junk food and the other environmental inputs, but there's a tipping point building, right, Tracy?
There is. So there's only so much I can say about this issue, but it's definitely between the ages of 2 months and 2 years. So if, as a parent, we are given this sense of knowing, right, that God gives us, right? This motherly or fatherly intuition. I know as a mom, I have it, right, where something's wrong with your child. A pediatrician cannot properly diagnose a child with autism. So don't ask your pediatrician. You can ask them, but don't trust them, because, it's such a big money business. But, you could do your research. You can, signs and symptoms. I do write all of that in part 2 of my book. What do you do if you think your child could have autism. So here's the questions you should be asking yourself. This is what, you might want to do. So it's very important for parents to take action and do their own work and their own due diligence in this matter.
Yes, thank you. It's really a main focus of the Primal Parenting podcast is to encourage you to seek out resources and use the community to get answers instead of just only relying on your mainstream information stream, because there are commercial and political and cultural influences into that. So it's kind of like who gets the fight over who gets the mic, right? And a lot of times that
Right.
money behind that mic. And so you're not going to just, you have to dig a little bit. So parents who are interested in digging more into both healing and prevention for these chronic childhood epidemics, we will have the resources in the show description for you to do so. And please go to Tracy. I'll let you give your socials and we'll post them below too, but go give Tracy some love because she has put together such an amazing story and information resource for parents to avoid these. So what are the best ways to reach out to you for health coaching or to buy your book? Obviously, we'll have a link as well, but social media channels that you want to share?
So a lot of my social media is through Facebook, or I do have a Twitter account. I have a Tracy Slepcevic. I have a Warrior Mom. I have the Autism Health Summit, or they can email me personally at tracy@warriormom.org, and it's TRACY. My book is sold wherever books are sold online, but you can also, if you want a signed hard copy, because you can't get the hard copy from Amazon or any other, place. And, it seems like Facebook and Twitter are kind of my, back and forth go-to.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And Tracy has her own conference as well. We'll link that information for the moms and dads out there who need help with these symptoms. And there's so many of us. And if you are dealing with these kinds of symptoms or getting these diagnoses, you are far from alone. And there are so many resources for you to help you and your child thrive. Thank you, Tracy, for being with us, the Warrior Mom. Really appreciate your expertise and all of those many years of study that we are benefiting from right now.
Well, I appreciate you as well. And thank you so much for having me on.